Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive, the all of our Baltimore Positive broadcast brought to you by our friends at Wise Markets. We have wise conversations around here, and part of sort of winding this all up and getting into spring and taking the Maryland Crab Cake Tour back out on the road, presented by our friends at the Maryland Lottery. I have some Betty Boop tickets with this guy here at Fadley's on Wednesday. We got some great guests coming up, but thought it's political season right now. Folks are running for office, and oftentimes we try to get to know new people, other folks running, incumbents, both sides of the aisle, all around the state. And I know you're the executive producer of all this, so please bring Dave Harden in here, Don.
Yeah, very excited to welcome running for Congress, Democratic primary, which has been moved. And we'll talk to Dave about the impact of that on his campaign and others, but looking to replace one of Nestor's favorite Congress people, Andy Harris. Anyone who listens to the show knows that Congressman Harris isn't getting a Christmas card from Nestor, so he's always eager to talk to folks who are looking to replace the congressman. We welcome Dave Harden. What I'm going to say, a lifelong, really career public servant. Dave, is that a good way to introduce you? You've been involved in foreign service for a long time.
Yeah. I was, I'm a Maryland boy. I grew up in the country. I went to public school here, but I was very honored to represent America on the toughest places on earth for 22 years. I was a career foreign service officer, a senior diplomat. I was appointed, even though I was career, I was also appointed by Obama and confirmed by the Republicans and the Democrats in the Senate to lead all responses to all crises around the world. And then under the Trump administration, I was based in Saudi Arabia, and I was given the highest award by Donald Trump in the Foreign Service, even though ultimately I had to resign because it was just too difficult to represent Trump in the Middle East. But big career representing America.
I don't want to know anything else, Don. I just want to know about that. I
could see Nestor coming out of his chair.
I think if you represented Donald Trump in Saudi Arabia, there's a limit to how honest you can be about what was going on over there. What would you like to tell someone like me that watched Khashoggi, and I'm a lifelong journalist, be butchered? What do you know about that?
Well, first of all, I quit. I quit in the Trump administration out of Saudi Arabia. And I left. Normally, when senior diplomats retire, it's a long kind of a walk out the door that takes a year, and it's a very soft landing. I gave 2 weeks notice. I left from Riyadh on actually it was close to it was April 15th, 2018. I walked out the door and I retired at the end of April. So I think that should tell you everything you want to know.
Well, why then? What would make someone like you who gave a career service, what would make you walk away? Did you ever consider that would have been your exit at some point, that you would be doing this, running for Congress?
No. I loved the Foreign Service. Our family was a Foreign Service family. We lived all over the world. I was a negotiator between Israelis and Palestinians. I was the first into Libya. I served 17 months in Baghdad. I did all the cross-border work in Syria. I dropped food aid in South Sudan. I loved it. Never wanted to leave. But I just thought that the chaos of the Trump administration was just too much to represent. And so I walked out the door and I opened up my own firm, the Georgetown Strategy Group. And I was never going to go back into politics until January 6th and Andy Harris's role in the January 6th attack on our Capitol.
Well, that really is the segue. We could talk about the former president until the cows come home, but I prefer to think of him in the rearview mirror. He did have an enabler in Congressman Harris. Congressman Harris continues to be proud of his support. Congressman Harris is one of those who thinks that January 6th was just a few people browsing through the Capitol, enjoying Statuary Hall. There's, almost like the scene in Animal House. There's nothing to see here. There's nothing to see here. That motivates you to run for this very, very difficult seat for Democrats. And you have you're going to have a spirited, but I'm assuming, very admirable primary campaign. We've got some good candidates running in the first district. Dave, when you, and I love the fact, hey, Nestor, you don't know this about Dave, but his great grandparents were from Kent County. They used to catch seafood and crabs. And guess where they sold them, Nestor? Guess where they sold
Lexington Market.
Fadley's.
There it is. See, I think it was just a good guess. That was a good guess. I like that.
And also, he grew up and did some farming up there at a little place that I know quite well called Westminster, where I went to what was then Western Maryland College, now McDaniel. So I feel.
Where did you grow up, Dave? Where are you from?
So I grew up in Westminster on a small farm that my parents still have, and I have a farm that's close to theirs. And by the way, my mom started out at Western Maryland too, Don, just to let you know.
There you go. Go Green Terrors. So
right.
You're going to be traveling. First of all, we always ask folks to describe your district, because one of the things that I think listeners get a sense of is, and I don't just mean geographically, Dave, I mean heart and soul stuff. This, as you're going around your district now, describe it for our listeners in terms of its geography, but also talk about the folks in the first.
Yeah. So, there's a lot of litigation and there's a lot of maps that are out there. So I'm going to just work with what we do know, which is the existing district right now, which is where I grew up. And where my family is from and where we have been forever. So it's a rural area, hardworking folks. They help their neighbor. They care about their word. When they give their word, it means something. They're not fancy. They just work hard and care. They care about their neighbors. It's in my DNA. It's exactly where I am from. And frankly, a lot of the rural communities in both on Maryland's eastern shore and on the western shore, like up along the Pennsylvania border, feel left behind and forgotten and aggrieved. And it's true. And, a lot of economic wealth, power, and social capital accumulates, say, between the Baltimore-Washington corridor, 270 to I-95. But what we're seeing is kind of an unwinding in a lot of our rural communities. And that's where I grew up. That's who I'm going to fight for. That's who I care about. These are my folks.
Dave, I spent some time last summer running all around the state. I'm from Baltimore, been here my whole life, and had never been out to Western. I had never been to Kent County. I had been to Millington because I have a friend that lives over there, but I still have never been to Rock Hall, as an example. But I've been to Chestertown. First time in my life I'd ever been to Chestertown, literally last summer, to have a crab cake, right? So I toured around, and one of the issues, and I talked to one of your opponents as well in the primary about cell service. And when I would get on back roads driving from Centerville to Churchill, Queen Anne, I went through all these, Denton for sure, had a crab cake in Denton, a lot of these places. And I'm thinking about education, and I'm thinking about meetings and people having to drive into town to do this, to Zoom with someone, or to have their child taught, or to teach if they're an educator. That this is an issue that I hear about in the city with, folks not being able to afford Wi-Fi, certainly when we had COVID and all that. But around the state, I just don't think so many people from Dundalk or Catonsville in Don's case, or I now live out in Baltimore County, the Towson area, that we have any thought about what it would be like to not have Wi-Fi or the availability of that. And it's such a game changer for education, information, work, everything that it's an economic driver that I don't think the modern folks here, you talk about all this thing that's going on in the 270 to 95 corridor. When you get outside of it and you start traveling some hills on the western side of the state, you're just living a different life from this that a lot of us live in.
Yeah, I mean, look, that's where I grew up. And it's true. I mean, the cell service, broadband, businesses can't compete. Kids can't compete in the school systems. It's just a drag on economic opportunity for rural folks. And at the end of this, it helps contribute to the polarization that we see in America today. Because frankly, Democrats lose like 90% of all rural counties across America. And what the reason I think for that is that the Democrats aren't able to really first of all, they're not able to listen. And secondly, they're not able to package to meet the needs of the folks in the rural communities. Too often we just say, you know what, these are a bunch of stupid rednecks that don't know what's good enough for themselves. But that's not the case. That's not listening. That's being pandemic. And what we really need to do is create economic opportunity in the rural communities so that if you have a high school education, you can have a life and a future for your family and your kids.
What would make a guy who voted for Trump, who's got a F Biden or Brandon or, whatever, because I've driven all of these back roads. I saw Confederate flags like I never thought possible on both sides of the state. And I certainly saw tons of what I've seen on television mainly, and sometimes I see on the eastern side of Baltimore County, which is someone that voted Democrat, their parents voted Democrat, my father worked at the Point, lifelong Union Democrat, that their grandchildren have moved in this other direction. And you need to win them. I mean, in order to win, and again, I've talked to your opponents. I'll probably talk to more people about this particular race than anything over the next 6 months because it is so important that how will people change their minds and watch Dave Harden come in and say, well, I was a Democrat with Kennedy. I was a Democrat with Carter. I was a Democrat even with Obama. But somehow ideology has moved so much that they don't perceive you as being a Democrat. They perceive you as almost being evil.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. So just a couple of observations. Number one, we don't have to win over everybody, right? You just have to win over enough Republicans. Ultimately, we have to take 35,000 votes away from Andy Harris and move it into the Democratic column. So that's the Hogan Republicans, that's the independent centrists who tend to be right center, and it's the Democrats. That probably gets you close to it, but I'm going to tell you a story. So when I filmed my launch video at Rock Hall, I filmed it at the pier, and a guy who had a boat with a big Trump flag was out there and an 18-inch gray beard, and he comes out, puffs out his chest, and he says, "Hey, you running for Congress or something?" And I'm like, "Yep, I am. I'm running for Congress. I'm running as a Democrat. My great-grandmother, Lillian Downey, grew up right there on Downey Avenue." He looks at me and he says, "I'm voting for you." Andy Harris doesn't listen. He doesn't care. He doesn't deliver. He doesn't respect us. The Watermen absolutely hate Andy Harris because he's in the pocket of Exelon, and he is part of the problem that results in the pollution that comes through the Conowingo Dam. So there's enough folks out there that I feel deep connectivity to that are going to be able to turn this around. And I just want to add one last point. Actually, two last points. I grew up here. I watched the Orioles play in the World Series in 1970. I saw Dave McNally hit a grand slam. No other candidate can even discuss that because they don't even know what we're talking about here. And then,
well, Don and I do.
Yeah, you guys do, but we're talking about the political candidates. You don't know what I'm talking about. And the other thing is, look, in the Foreign Service, I mainly worked with communities that had been left behind and forgotten and aggrieved and that were on the verge of conflict or in conflict. And I listened to them and we tried to deliver for them. And I just thought after January 6th, when my son called me from the Middle East, because he's an Air Force officer, and he said, "We look like we're in the middle of a civil war." I thought to myself, I got to use the same skills that I've learned overseas as a diplomat to listen to my people, to listen to the people that I went to elementary school with, and to figure out how we're going to deliver economic opportunity for them.
It's interesting, Dave, when I listen to you talk. I often comment to my wife when a couple of folks from Congress come on the cable networks, and I go, they're fascinating, and they have a slightly different Democratic message that I think resonates with Main Street America. And I think of an Abigail Spanberger from Virginia. I think of a Mikey Sherrill from New Jersey. These are, former CIA agents, folks who spent time in the armed forces, and they share those core democratic values, but they're able to do so in a way that says, I get you. And you said something earlier that I think Democrats truly need to pay attention to. We've all seen that map of a presidential election where it's color coded, red and blue by county. And when Democrats look at that, there's very little blue on that map of the United States of America. As you pointed out, 90% or so of these counties vote Republican. And Democrats need to be able to speak to folks in Westminster, in Hampstead, in Rock Hall.
Well, one of the issues is, are they heard? Can a Democrat be heard in those places, right? With the silos, Don, is what I'm talking about.
Right. Well, that's a question for Dave. Dave, you mentioned the Trump voter, and I see them all the time. I spend a fair amount of time in Kent Island as well, and I see the boats in front of my place with the Trump sign.
I've seen the guy next door with the flag. Yeah.
I like Nestor's question. You mentioned the one Trump voter who talked about Harris being complicit in not helping clean up the Bay. Really, really strong point. What else, as you go, because I'm sure you're going out every night, every afternoon now, shaking hands, going to small meetings, going into restaurants, bars, farms. What are people telling you about the United States of America?
Yeah, let me just touch on a couple points that you raised very quickly. Like Abigail Spanberger and Nikki Sherrill, I have 225 national security pros that have endorsed me. So ambassadors, generals, intel officers, senior diplomats, they've all publicly come out for me. So I wanted you to be aware of that. Secondly, the Democrats have a very hard time going to the Graysonville VFW, and it's not one Trump voter or one Waterman, but meeting with the Queen Anne's County Watermen's Association, where there are 35 folks there at 7 a.m. on a Sunday morning at the VFW in Graysonville and listening to what they have to say. That's what I do. And these are my folks, so I'm totally comfortable with all of this. I think what people are telling me is the economy. They don't want to be left behind. They want their kids to have the opportunities that the kids in Chevy Chase have. They don't want their kids to leave Denton and work at an Amazon warehouse, for $15 an hour off of Route 40. That's not what they want. They want to have their small businesses grow. The other two things that I hear is that we're mainly common sense folks in this district. We don't like crazy. We don't want left crazy. We don't want right crazy. We just want leaders who can get stuff done. And we want to tone down the politics and amp up the results. So I think we feel that too. And I don't want to miss the point too, that the world has changed dramatically as a result of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And there will be economic pain that working families are going to feel as a result of changes in the global market. This also presents opportunities for us to build an economic future and build almost the next American century. And people are worried about where we are, both in America and in the world. And so, I think that I bring the tested leadership. I'm not a career politician. People don't really like career politicians in this district. They don't want their vote taken away from them by manipulation, by, party apparatchiks. They want to have a real choice, a real primary, and then a real general election. And Andy Harris is actually uniquely vulnerable this time.
Well, Dave, real quick, you've been very gracious with your time. We hope to have you back on. Give us an update. We talked about moving the primary. Two quick questions. What's the impact of moving the primary on you? And secondly, folks who are listening, they say, that's my kind of Democrat. That's what I've been telling you now. How do they find out more? So two things, impact of the primary.
I got something for him at the end too. Hang on.
Oh, Nestor has something.
Oh, but it's more important than any of this. It's about crab cakes.
Right.
So yeah, let's.
All right, the delay of the primary helps me. The litigation is confusing. It may very well be the case that because you need to solve this the county, state, and federal lines all together in order to have it. It's very possible this gets pushed back even further. But let's be clear: delaying the primary helps me. We're in this fight. We're ready to win it. We're ready to take back decency and common sense for this district. And you can find more out about me at hardenforcongress.com, HARDEN for Congress.com. I didn't launch until we had the steers in the barn last spring. So that's the kind of campaign I'm running.
Dave, I'm impressed by, your travels in the world and your service, and I appreciate that. The Ukraine situation, is there anything you would add from where we are right this minute? Because we know it changes hour by hour, not just how Biden's handled it, but what ultimately the end game is. I mean, you're a pretty seasoned veteran when it comes to foreign affairs. I'd say spies and people that are involved in all. What do you know about Putin? What should people in Baltimore and Chestertown and Kent Island and said? What should we all know about Putin?
I mean, I think there's a couple things. First of all, in some respects, it's too early to predict what the outcomes are going to be. Tomorrow Putin could get a bullet between the eyes, or he could launch a tactical nuclear weapon. We simply don't know. So I would keep eyes on adjacent risks, right? Any friction points between Russia and NATO, any spillovers into Western Europe with refugees that give rise to authoritarian backlash. I would keep an eye on Iran as they just paused the Iranian negotiations regarding their nuclear weapons programs. I would keep an eye on China. I would keep an eye on the Korean Peninsula and North Korea launching ICBMs. And then lastly, the economic fallout of this is going to be painful. We can't mince words here. Inflation is going to be more sustained. We're going to see food shock prices. We're going to see food insecurity. We're going to see food grievances, not only in the United States, but around the world. All of this crisis does give an opportunity for America to assert leadership and for folks in this district to be leaders, not only on renewable energy and climate technologies, but in terms of feeding the world and in terms of leading the world. So I'm bullish on America's role and this first district's role in what this new future can be. But let's be clear, lots of risks out there and pain coming our way.
Does this thing keep China out of Taiwan? The mess that this has created for Putin, is it a little bit of a warning to China that because there's no question that's a step that people in your position were probably more concerned about than anything, right?
I think it's too early to say. We don't know what the outcome is. I mean, for sure, the early analysis that would be that Russia was going to do blitzkrieg and just take over Kyiv. And so the fact that they stalled a little bit, does give China some pause. But, we really don't know what the world is going to look like. And I do think that China is trying to be the winner in this conflict and this great power competition. But let me end on this point. I would rather be America right now than China or Russia. When you add in America and its allies in the UK and in the EU, and then in the Asian Pacific Basin, we are a strong, fulsome, powerful, both economically and from a military perspective, bloc. So I would much, much rather be America.
Now, listen, Don handled politicians for years, so I'm going to mute his button because he's going to not let you answer this. But I've never been to Rock Hall. I'm going to Rock Hall for a crab cake in August, perhaps with you, along the trail. Where am I going in Rock Hall for a crab cake, Dave?
Right on the pier. There's a seafood restaurant. I've forgotten the name at the moment, but it's literally right on the pier of Rock Hall. That's where you want to go.
See, Don wouldn't let you answer that because you'd offend the guy down the street who has a crab cake too, right?
You say them all, but I think you should catch up with Dave.
Oh, right. Well, okay, but I'm just telling you the straight answer, right?
Right. Well, right. I mean, that's what I want from him, trying to figure out if you're a politician or not.
Nestor,
I'm not a politician. I'm a leader.
And that's not a bad slogan. Real quick, we're going to let you run. I think what you said, your last point, Dave, should not get lost in the past several weeks. And that is that with the help of President Biden, what has been reasserted is the power and leadership of the United States of America. And that should make all of us Democrat, Republican, Independent, proud, because we once again are standing up for what is right, and we'll see how this thing plays out. So I think your last point, very, very important. Listen, good luck out on the campaign trail. Kiss the baby, shake some hands, and keep us posted.
Thank you very much, guys. It was great to be here.
Dave Harden, he's running for Congress in the 1st. On the Democratic side, great conversation. We call them wise conversations around here. We're going to amp it up, ramp it up. We're going to be at Fadley's on Wednesday, having a crab cake on the Maryland Crab Cake Tour, presented by the Maryland Lottery. I got Betty Boop lottery. It's just fun to say Betty Boop, so I like saying that. We're giving some lottery tickets away. We're getting the Crab Cake Tour back out on the road as well. On behalf of former Baltimore County Executive Don Moeller and my high school guidance counselor, we are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. We never stop talking Baltimore positive.